we stop seeing individuals as separate particles, which
Oh my
I believe
goodness.
is a
Yes.
collective trauma symptom, that we feel separate, and so that we learn to think in these boxes, like mechanistic boxes,
Hmm.
but that every person's childhood trauma is embedded in their ancestral stream. Otherwise, most of the trauma wouldn't have happened. So the fact that they are interdependent, so then there's this beautiful pendulum that you described, and that we need to be present again and again how that pendulum plays out, and that helps an organism to unfold and grow and release and heal and become more integrated. So I think you described this really well, and that it underlines interdependence, that we are not separate. And and then maybe you can speak a little bit before we summarize our conversation. Maybe you can speak a little bit. I know in Dick's work, and I'm sure you're doing this as well. So the
Yeah.
individual, the ancestral, and then is the collective. So the collective legacy burdens. Maybe you can speak a little bit to the bigger cultural field, and how can we imagine, or how do you experience like cultural legacy burdens? And how can we work with those strong cultural fields that we grow up in, that we were conditioned by, that we carry in, that are interwoven in our nervous system?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the cultural burdens that, you were talking about us collective versus individual and how we have siloed ourselves, so to speak. Well, that's one of the US cultural burdens anyway, and that's patriarchy, right? That, we do things ourselves and not looking at us as a collective and the connectedness between humans. So these cultural burdens, whether we're born in the US or outside of the US, there are burdens that are connected to the culture and society in which we are raised. And so, four of the cultural burdens that Dick Schwartz speaks of in his work that I connect with is racism, patriarchy, materialism, and individualism. So, these are the burdens that we carry. Folks in the US. Now, some of those burdens you will also see in other cultures, but you also see culture burdens like famine and war and classism, colorism that may also be in US culture and cultures outside. So I always tell people to look at, I often speak to the US cultural burdens because I'm born in the US, most of my clients are from the US. However, when we're working outside, we also need to be sensitive and aware of what burdens other cultures hold because they still show up in our systems very similarly. Like I have to do this, this is required, and there's no thinking about it. You're programmed from a very early age in these cultural burdens. And what it is we are absorbing as little people what is coming our way, and we're taking things in and paying attention to what's happening around us and what's right and what's wrong and how we need to show up, but much of that is part of our cultural programming.
Mm, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's very beautiful. That's very beautiful. And I think also that here again, like the conventional therapy model that needs to be opened up into, and the map needs to be opened up so that we include all these layers, not as separate things, but as an interdependent stream of what it means to be a human being. We are all context and we are all individuated, but it doesn't mean that we are separate. And I think that separation is already a sign of the cultural fragmentation. And that's different from being individuated. And so it's beautiful. So how can we work with those cultural legacy burdens? Is it a similar process, or how do you?
You hit it right on the head, Thomas. It is a similar process. Again, asking the person what doesn't belong to them, what belongs to the culture. And then we have a way that they can release this to the culture. Sometimes with cultural burdens, I also bring in the ancestors because some of the cultural burdens also run on ancestral lines,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, of
Every person,
course,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. So we
Mhm.
may do the release with the ancestors and we may not. It just depends. But we can do it exactly the same way with the ancestors. And in IFS, often we release our burdens to the elements. So we might bring in one of the elements as a way, like they want to release it to water or to air. And people can release burdens in any way that seems right for their system. So sometimes people come up with how they want to release the burden, and it may not have anything to related to their ancestors nor one of the elements, or maybe some other way that they come up with releasing their burdens. Yeah. And the other thing that's really important after releasing burdens is to then connect with, 'cause our parts are the ones who are holding the burdens, right? They're parts within our system that took on these beliefs and behaviors. So once we release the burdens, we always want to invite in the positive qualities, or for the part to reconnect with the qualities that were obscured by the burdens that it was holding.
So then basically once the trauma releases, you feel deeper into the resource that is deeper under,
Yes.
like the river. The
Yes.
river. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, because now we want to be able to have these resources and use them, right? Because
Mhm.
those were the ones that the parts came into being with. And now they can connect back to those resources.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful.